So my name is Rachel Duke.
My name is Abigail Ray, and we are members of Cohort 9 of the Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute at Miami University. And so Cohort 9 is focusing on Envision 2040, where we're taking a look at how we can embrace change or in the imminent digital transformation that will take place over the next 20 years. And so one of our primary focuses is on embracing inclusion and specifically how we can become better allies. So today we're speaking with Dean Sukumaran, who is our current dean of the College of Engineering and Computing at Miami. So Dean Sukumaran has done a lot of work surrounding diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And we're super excited to learn more about your work and to hear about your experiences.
So our first question for you today is, how would you personally define allyship, and what does allyship mean to you?
So allyship, what does it mean to me? Okay. I think in that case, so we used to, in fact, the first time I came across a formal program along those lines was a faculty mentorship program that was started at North Dakota State, and it was through an NSF advanced grant, and it was called Advocates and Allies. And the reason they started that was around faculty members, because they didn't, and it was in the ECE department. And it was actually started by a dual career couple. So they were there, Janan Bilal Green and Roger Green. And they were trying to get more women faculty in ECE at North Dakota State, which was a challenge in itself. And then, once they brought in these women faculty, how were they treated? How did they feel part of the department? How could they be supported? So Janan was the PI, but Roger was the one who did the work with the male faculty in that department. So they would get together and they wanted to create a safe space where they could have honest discussions, right? And it was around how to become effective allies in supporting women. And he said he had to find ways to get people to change their attitudes as well as how they perceive their women colleagues in their midst and how they thought about. So he said he had to use personal, the only way to get people to change some of those very ingrained attitudes is to look at their personal life and how those changes might benefit them in the long run. So he said if they had, first he targeted faculty who had others, who had spouses who were in academia. And then he targeted faculty who had daughters because they know, so that is how he went about it. But he said getting them to be, so in this case, it was like, how to not mansplain someone or how to give them equal talking time in department meetings, how to make sure that their contributions through service was not undervalued compared to what male colleagues did, which was, research and teaching, right? So it was along that. So I think it's a process. I don't think so. When I think about allyship, I think these are people who understand the challenges at an intrinsic level, right? They truly have to do some deep thinking and examining of their attitudes and perceptions, and also recognizing that all of us have implicit biases and how to overcome that, and then to step into that role where they could become not mentors, I would say, where they were there to support the minority, right? They're there to support them and almost do it from a selfless perspective sometimes. Because, you see this even going on right now, right? Lots of the discussion, I think it's about they're so worried that they lose their status in society. Right? And we're seeing that tussle in almost, across the nation, in any field that you take. It is because it was much easier for certain groups of people to get jobs and stay in those jobs and climb through the ranks. But so now they have to relinquish that, right? It is not going to be, and they have to give other people a seat at the table and recognize the fact that these folks didn't have a seat at the table, not because of their lack of achievements, but because of, whatever it might be, our prejudices and biases, right? So it does mean giving up something to be an effective ally.
Yeah,
Long response.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. And another thing we wanted to focus on too is why should people in the majority group care about allyship, and why is it important?
Again, we can talk till we are, and I think sometimes I try to take different approaches to make this point, right? Sometimes I get it, depending on who the audience is, from economic standpoint. I say that, especially in our field, right, engineering or computing design, if you do not have diverse people at the table, you will not have the best designs, or you will not have the best products, you will not have the best software. So we can think of it from that very capitalistic viewpoint. The other thing is, if you look at the US population, how it's changing, it is going to be a majority minority, meaning the population is changing, right? And we have to recognize that reality. And not only that, if you look at college age students, we are seeing a decline in the numbers. So if we want more people to come into our profession, and in fact, you can look at this report that came from the National Science Board, I think end of last year. And this year it came from the Pentagon, saying that as a nation, we will not be competitive if we do not have more engineers and computer scientists graduating from our programs, right? So with our current composition, there's no way we can get to that. So we have to open the doors, and not only open the doors, but we also have to say these professions are welcoming places for these diverse people. Because if not, why would they come? Why would they choose us over a medical field or law or anything else, right? Because they also have options. And I think some of those professions have done it more effectively. They have changed. Because we have seen the composition of doctors, it has changed over the years. And same thing with lawyers, it has changed. But our field is still stuck. And in fact, in some cases, we've seen a decline. And we've seen that in CS. And so when people say, oh, there's certain sections that can't do programming, it's only this thing. It actually came about that if you looked at when, during World War II, all our coders were women. But then after that, with the advent of personal computers, that is when we start seeing this decline. Because families started, again, it's that cultural factors, right? Who did we buy the computers for? And who did not have access to those computers? So that is when we started seeing the decline. And I also have my own theory. I also think that when computer science became a high-paying, high-status profession, that's when we saw women drop out. At least that's one of my theories.
Well, Well, thank you. We through our research, we've realized that the population is going to dramatically shift within the next 20 years from the minority group we know today becoming the new majority. So
Yeah,
it's interesting and very important that our field changes with the times as well.
exactly.
I was wondering if you'd be able to share a story about a time when somebody acted as an ally to you and it was able to impact you professionally and it helped you and it really made a difference.
Hmm.
If you don't have anything, that's totally okay. We can always.
No. I'm sure there are. It did come up during a different time, right? I still remember even my strongest supporters and even my PhD, like one of my PhD advisors, he was a strong supporter of mine in that he wanted me to succeed. But I still remember him telling me, because I had met my spouse and we got married during my PhD. And his first thing when I was looking for a position, I went to him and I said, I really wanted a academic position. I need your help because and his first thing, oh, you need to spend some time with your spouse and maybe you should, that so it was a different time. I know I'm sure in a very different generation, right? Because and I'm sure he was thinking of it from that perspective, but for me, it rankled at that time. I wasn't happy to hear that because I was like, you wouldn't be saying this to the men in the group, right? Yeah. And when, especially after I spent like 4 years working on it. But I would say that was more prevalent. The one ally that I can definitely speak about was, and I definitely do think was, in fact, he was department chair at Purdue when I graduated, but he never taught me. And in at Purdue, the size of the school, right? Civil engineering itself had our number of faculty total in engineering and computing. So they had 80 odd faculty. And we had our own building. So he was department head. And I knew him because, I think I had lunch with him once. But he actually recommended me for positions. He stepped in because he knew I had immigration issues, right? Because I was a foreign student. So he recommended me for this position at ExxonMobil. But then ExxonMobil could not hire me because of my visa status. So this. But I remember him stepping in to help, and that meant a lot. And I kept that in mind, and at every step of my career, I would go back to him and I would tell him, "You helped me every step. I would like you to be part of this step as well." And he was there throughout. Yeah. So very different. And yeah, Professor Drenovich is somebody I think of as an ally.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's awesome that somebody who you didn't even work with super closely was able to like step in and be an ally for you.
Yeah.
It's really awesome.
Yeah. Exactly.
I wanted to go back to when you were telling your story of when you were getting your PhD. How did you overcome that obstacle of that bias towards you? And of course, you said you probably didn't mean it was coming from a different time, different generation. But what are some ways that people can overcome those different types of biases, or how did you yourself?
So, and that was not, in fact, there were lots of them. I went to work for a oil company, and in fact, and oil companies by law, there is a federal law that says you cannot hire international people in the oil companies. So you cannot sponsor a visa. So no oil company can do that. Yeah. So, and I don't know, it's historical. So it's been there for a long time. But I work for them as a contractor. So what I would say to overcome that was, I always looked at it like, what can I do to keep furthering my career, right? And it is baby steps at a time. And you hear a lot of no's. And I remember when I was at this oil company, I loved working there. I had some of the best colleagues, there was an opening at one of the firms that worked in the offshore oil industry. So it was just along the lines in which I was working on. I interviewed with them, but I didn't get a good feeling. So I came back, and then my boss that I work with, he said, "Oh, I got a call," and they said, "Oh, a woman in offshore oil industry, that's not going to happen now." So, yeah, so I knew, when I interviewed itself, and maybe, and sometimes I think some of those things, I always think things happen for a reason. Maybe it's, that is just not the right place, right? From there, I went to Norway. And in Norway, in fact, lots of women went to offshore oil rigs, and it was nothing, no big deal, right? And I got to work at this place, which is considered one of our premier research institutions. So you just keep focusing on what you can do, right? You cannot change people's perceptions of you because of who you are. Meaning, I didn't try to change to fit into their, and I don't know how I would change. I couldn't, right? I mean, gender is something, at least in this case, it was something I owned and I was proud of. And so I just kept focusing on what I could do, and I just took it as maybe that is just not the right place for me, and I shouldn't be in that environment, right? So I kept focusing on what I would say what I wanted to do, and from there, that's when I interviewed at Rowan, and I really felt like I wanted to be with students. I was disillusioned with academia when I left my PhD, but I knew I loved teaching. I love my students. I wanted to go back to that. And that is where I feel I could make a difference, right? And I wanted, and I don't even talk about some of these stories because I don't want you to think that's how the profession is, right? Because I don't want you to have those negative, and I'm sure it has changed in the 30 years since then. But you still hear of stories, and I know because my students have come back and asked for advice on certain situations. But you want it to be better for the next generation that comes along, right? So that is what I always focused on. That it should never be, because and I've also seen some of the older women who did come before me, not all, but some who would say, "Oh, tough luck, it was bad for me, so you have to tough it out," right? I didn't want that to be the case ever. That shouldn't be nobody should have to tough it out. It should be easier for you. That's all. So I kept that focus.
No, thank you. And that's really inspiring to hear of, how you were able to get to now where you are, and brings a lot of hope for the future for, I think, all women in engineering.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that was the reason I wanted to come back to engineering again. I just, you get to a place in your life where you think that's where you can make the most positive impact. So, so that is what I keep that in focus. And I look at you and I think, yes, that is the right decision.
So what advice, what are some things that professionals can do in their everyday lives to be better allies to people in minorities, or anyone in general, their coworkers, or maybe some things you've done or some things that you would advise other people to do?
So I can tell you some of the things that, I would definitely, that I talk to my colleagues every day, even at Miami, right? Yeah. And these are some of my faculty colleagues, but also other colleagues that I work with. I always say, when it comes to hiring, that we look beyond, in some ways, you have to look at somebody's personal history to see how far they've come, and assess them from that viewpoint, right? And it's tough to do that when you look at just a resume. So I always push them to go beyond their comfort zones. And I always point it out, you have gone for your comfort zone right here when you have chosen this person or that person, because that is whom you feel comfortable with. So now try to, and I think nobody wants to do that. It does require someone sometimes pointing it out, right? And I do that I do that in various meetings. So it might not only be with our faculty, it could even be in leadership, right? Like when I think that, and it need not be just me, I do feel a strong sense that I have to give voice to people who don't have a voice at that table. So from my experience, because of some of the things that I've gone through, I don't think there might be other people who have gone through, right? So I have to bring that viewpoint up. So that's what I try to do: bring those experiences up and say, how do we mitigate against that? So in terms of faculty searches, I have asked them, can we recruit more broadly? Can we start asking for a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement in addition to a teaching and research statement? And I said, if we ask for that statement, we have to look at it as seriously as we look at the other two statements as well. So try and then bringing in best practices that I've seen work at other institutions, because we can always go back and say, oh, there's not enough of this or enough of that, right? And so I show them the data. I show them, because we are engineers and computer scientists, we love our numbers, right? I show them the percentages. Look at the percentage, and these schools have these people, so maybe we should reach out to these schools. So we have to go above and beyond, I feel, to be effective allies, right? And to open the doors to people that we haven't opened the doors to in the past. And it's hard, especially say at an institution that has been majority white or majority, right? It is because when someone looks from outside, like even me, like when I was looking at Miami, I thought I did have a bit of anxiety thinking, will I fit in, right? Will I fit into that area? Will I fit into the school? So I have to look at that as well. So I do think of it from the candidate's perspective, as well as how do we make it better so that we are evaluating people on, I would say, a more fair way. and that's true of our students. And I speak about that as well with our admissions. And I say that sometimes, when we say we are being equal, that is not being equitable, right? Equal is not equitable. Equal, and I always give the example of even my personal, like if I were to take my family member, I would say that person shouldn't be evaluated the same way as, say, a child who comes from a very different background where their parents have a very different educational background, right? So because I have to look at my child and say, this person has all these privileges, and that is why he or she could score the way she did or do well. So I've used my own family as examples to counteract some of that. Especially in my previous institution, here I've started doing that, right? But it takes time. Yeah.
I think that's really great advice to like look at somebody holistically and to continue pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone to make
Yes,
more. I
yes.
think that's really important.
Yeah, yeah. And I did hear about companies, in fact, my partner, my spouse is in industry, and he said they are going to actually remove the names from resumes. So that's a good way. And I said, yes, and I said that's a good way to assess candidates. Here it's tough. In our fields, it's tough because it will show up in the rest of the documents, right? So if we were to black out everybody's, it will be a whole sea of black. So, and there's some ways to figure out because it's still too small, I feel, the numbers, and you can figure it out. But I think, doing those blind reviews have really worked for music, for lots of industry. And I know in med school too, they started doing that and admitting their students. Yeah.
So that kind of goes along with our next question, with being an ally to someone who you don't know. So, for example, that would be a perfect way of being an ally to students you have yet to meet or have yet to be enrolled. And I know you had mentioned that one of the biggest allies for you was that professor who you'd never talked to before. So how can, the everyday person act as an ally to someone they know nothing about?
Yeah, I think we started this actually following that Advocates and Allies program. We started a peer mentoring program at my previous institution. And the way we had structured it was, juniors and seniors would mentor freshmen and sophomores. And then alumni would mentor our juniors and seniors, right? But what we saw was that we tried so hard to figure out who might be a suitable ally for a certain student and so on, right? But I think it still requires some self-examination. And I think what you get with, say, the Lockheed Martin, where you do some of those deeper dives into thinking through this, right? And I think it does require checking some of our privilege at the door and then stepping in to listen and learn. So just because you're a mentor doesn't mean you don't learn from your mentee, right? It's a two-way street. So I would think that if we want to set something like that up, I know we do that with the Society of Women Engineers and so on, but I think there has to be some additional training that we provide our students. I don't think we should just throw them in and say, now you be a mentor. I don't think that would be effective allyship. But if you were to be an effective ally, it would be, again, thinking from the viewpoint that you want to ease their path, right? You don't want it to, if you faced any challenges in terms of coursework or in terms of signing up for classes or figuring out which organization you wanted to be in or figuring out which professor you wanted to be in, the next person coming in, you're sharing some of that knowledge with them, right? And you want them, and you are going to tell them, this is where I had a challenge and this is maybe a solution to that, right? So again, figuring out how you might ease their path. It shouldn't be as difficult as it was for you. So every generation or every person, if they do that with each passing, I think it would just make it easier. And I don't think we even have to, there are certain cultural factors, like we looked at matching up by demographics, by gender, I'm not sure if that is even necessary. I do think we can be effective allies to people that don't look like us, right? And we might not understand their lived experiences, but that is part of the learning, right? When you listen to each other, you will learn. They will learn about your lived experience and you will learn about their lived experience. And I think it's an enriching process for both people. So that's what I would say, that we should think about it at Miami. How can we set something like this up?
Thank you. Thank you for your advice. I think that's something we've found a lot through all of our research and all of our reading, that the most important thing is, just being there for someone and being open-minded and continuing to learn.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So our next question then is, when you see someone who's not being a very good ally, or when you see something that's unfair, how do you know when you should step in? And do you think that is it better to address the situation up front and kind of act as an ally there, or to do it in a more personal setting? How do you think the best approach for that is?
I have always found that it is for all these, like even when I taught, right, I have seen behaviors that I wasn't happy with in the classroom, but I would never call them out publicly. Because I just think it doesn't serve a purpose, right? It makes whoever they were being mean to, and maybe it was unconscious or they didn't realize. So I always have private conversations with these, whatever their power level might be. And in some cases, they were in positions that were more powerful than I was. I was. I would always have a private conversation, call them. I would explain to them what that action meant to whoever they were doing that to, and how we should get past that. And if I was the one on the receiving end, I also still call them out, but always privately. I don't think it serves much purpose to call it out publicly. It just makes everybody uncomfortable. Of course, there are certain things that you have to call out publicly, right? But for most things where you're hoping for them to be effective allies, I would rather do that privately. Yeah.
So then how do you gain the courage to speak up against somebody who's like higher up than you, and how do you that, because sometimes they're not going to think that they should listen to you, and how do you go about that?
Yes, so I can give you an example of that, and in that case I did look for another ally who would also work with me. So I was on this committee.
I think you may have muted yourself.
I'm so sorry.
No,
yeah, so it was a committee that was composed of, let's say, professors, presidents of universities. It was set up by the governor of New Jersey. And it was to look at some aspect of our education within the state universities. And I was in the subgroup that was focused on research because I was VP for research at Rowan at that time. And in this group, we had a president of a university who every time, he dominated the conversation. And I was sitting next to him. Anytime, and I was trying to get the others to speak. And anytime I spoke, he would put his hand on my arm and silence me, like. So I didn't say anything, and after that I went to the person who was running our whole group, and she was in our I would say the chancellor for education, higher ed, the associate vice chancellor. And I told her, I said, this is what, and New Jersey at that time, our governor was very liberal, and I knew him, I had a lot of respect for him. But they were going through, they had instituted rules that because there was an allegation of harassment during the elections. So it was like, if anybody came up, the first question was like, do you want to file a complaint? And I said, I don't want to file a complaint, but I want this to stop. And I want to have a voice at the table. If not, I will not participate because you don't want to hear my views. And so what she did and what I did, we actually got together and we thought through how can we solve this. So she actually put some folks at that table who came from the governor's office who would disrupt that behavior. And I think he was told, you have to stay away and let them do their work. And I actually found an ally from Princeton who was at my table, and we worked together. And so we ran a committee from then on, and he was, I mean, just an amazing human being, so we work well. So sometimes you look for allies to amplify your voice, right? Because in this case, it was, and I went and told my president as well, and I said, this happened. I don't know if I'm putting you in an awkward spot, but I had to do this. And he said, it's okay. You have to do it. And because, there's always lots of politics when it's different institutions, it's a president I was like, oh my God, maybe he'll call and he'll say something. But I didn't care, but that didn't matter. But I just felt that I had to say what I had to say, right? And it had to stop. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's really brave and inspiring to, think about doing that rather than just kind of accepting it and saying, oh, okay, I'm not going to talk then. I think that's really awesome.
Exactly. And I think, the key is to look for other allies who will amplify. So it is not only you that has to fight this thing, right? And sometimes it is looking for allies from the majority. Like the professor from Princeton, he is, I can't say more because then his identity would be known, right? But he is, he's a gentleman, but he is also, white, and he was in a powerful position, but he's wanted to step in to help. And we became very good friends. I mean, we could talk about lots of things and, and he just felt like he wanted to do that. And you will be surprised to find how many such allies you will have out there, right? So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so our final question for you is, sorry, since being an ally, we talked about, is just a continuous journey and we're always evolving. What are ways that you personally, continue to learn and try to be better?
Yeah, I mean, every day, right? You never stop learning. That is one thing for sure. And I think I learned from you. I learned from my colleagues. I try to, I remember, I think it was the first meeting with the faculty here at Miami, and I'm a first-gen college student, and I said something about first-gen college students that didn't come out the right way. And one of the faculty members pointed it out to me. She did it privately, but I realized, right? I said something that sometimes it is also, for me, it's when I process, English has something, it's almost like a native tongue, but still not a native tongue, right? So sometimes I can say the wrong things. So I did apologize, and I never think it is, I always apologize when I make such mistakes and learn from it. And I'm so glad that she pointed it out and that she felt comfortable that she could point it out, right? So I always say, if I make a mistake, please let me know. There's no ego here, right? We're here to learn together. We're at an educational institution, and I would say that is the key, right? We keep growing as individuals, and I can tell you, one of my biggest learning experiences. I had to learn the language around LGBTQ plus inclusion. And when we started an Out in STEM chapter at my previous institution, it was my grad student who started it, but I didn't know. And it's an evolving language, right? And sometimes I think, oh my God, I'm going to say the wrong things. I'm going to offend someone. But I have to make a concerted effort to learn. And I apologize ahead of time because I'll say I might not get all my language straight, but but I am deeply committed to it, and I'm trying my best to learn. And it is, and our culture is always changing, and we have to change with it, right? And that is the goal. And I hope that people see me for that. That I am constantly evolving like you are, and I'm learning like you are, and that we are all on this continuum of learning.
Thank you. Thank you for your advice. It's, yeah, just as you said, we're learning and we're students. However, you're still learning, and you're the dean of a college, so it never ends, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's part of the
Yes. It's part of what we do, right? And sometimes I do things, in our current, probably because of our overuse of social media, people are not that forgiving of those mistakes. I think sometimes you have to step out and say if it's repeated mistakes, then it's intentional, right? But if it's a one-off, you have to be able to forgive and move on. And and you have to look into you have to look at each one as an individual and assess them for that, right? So anything else? So what are your majors? Rachel, you are
biomedical.
Biomedical. And Abby?
Mechanical.
Mechanical. Okay. And which years?
We're juniors.
Oh, juniors. Both are juniors. Okay. So you have an internship this summer?
I do. Abby, I don't know what you're.
I do too.
You do too. Okay. And where are you going?
I'm going to be interning with Covance, which is the drug development lab core.
Okay. And you, Abby?
And then I'm interning with Ravisys. They're a systems engineering firm in Aurora.
Very nice. Okay. Good. So both of you are set for the summer then. But it's been such a pleasure to just talk to you.